Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Wellbeing and Study, hosted by Counselling and Psychological Services at RMIT University. The Counselling Armchair is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, everyone, depending on what time of day you're tuning in. Welcome back to the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Wellbeing and Study. We're so pleased to be back with you in 2024. Today, we're going to tackle a topic that we hope will be empowering for our listeners as we delve into the crucial art of setting boundaries, mastering assertive communication, and gracefully saying no when you need to. We are joined by our special guest, Megan McCabe, who listeners may remember from the episode on sailing through group work storms. Megan will be sharing valuable insights on identifying and establishing healthy boundaries, as well as talking us through communication styles and how to communicate assertively, and finally, on knowing when to say no and how to say no in a way that avoids those uncomfortable feelings of guilt. Whether you're struggling to get your own needs met or you want to learn about how to stand up for yourself in tricky situations, we hope that we can give you some pearls of wisdom today. Welcome back, Megan. It's so great to have you back with us again. For those listeners who've not heard your previous appearance as our resident expert, would you mind telling our listeners a bit about you and your interest in setting boundaries and assertive communication?
Hi, thanks for having me back. And yeah, I love boundaries and assertiveness. I don't know that I always succeed at them, but I, sure like talking about them. I think it's a really important thing, and particularly, we come up against it as psychologists all the time, managing our professional boundaries and being able to communicate effectively. So, I think it's relevant to us.
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely in our wheelhouse, isn't it? And we do see it a lot with the clients that come and speak to us, as it's something that they do commonly struggle with. So, hopefully it's very topical today.
Yes.
So maybe we could just jump right in because we've got lots of questions. So what do we mean when we talk about boundaries? We're not talking about the fence around a property, right? So why are good boundaries important?
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that, Melissa, because I often talk about boundaries with the metaphor of a fence around a property, because I think that's a good way of thinking about boundaries, that, ultimately boundaries are there to try and keep us safe. They give us some structure, they give other people some structure and prevent confusion and miscommunication and all those sorts of things. So, I often try to explain it to people with the fence metaphor that, if you imagine somebody with really, really tight boundaries, really strict and rigid boundaries, is a bit like having a fortress kind of wrapped around you, that big impenetrable stone wall with, a drawbridge that is guarded by guards and no one can get in unless they have the right password or something. Those are those people that, they just don't give you anything. They give you no information about themselves. They're hard to get to know. Yeah, that's, I guess, a bit of a metaphor for that kind of a person. And then on the other side of things, it might be those people that have no boundaries. That's a bit like having a house with sort of this broken down rickety old gate around it that, you can easily just step over, and, there's no guard dogs or no one that's sort of protecting. The front door's unlocked. Those are those people that, they're an open book. They tell you everything about their life. They tell you, their life story just on the tram if you've just met them. That there's no boundaries there, that they kind of, what you see is what you get, and they'll tell you everything kind of thing. Somewhere in the middle is probably what we'd like to aim for, that we have, our house has got a nice fence around it that's not too high, but it's high enough that people can't just jump over it, and the gate's fixed. It's, it's a good working gate, but we can open it when we need to, and that we might have a doorbell so that we can check in with who's there before we let them in, and those sorts of things. It's sort of an adequate, amount of safety around our house, but it's not like a fortress kind of level.
I love
hopefully that sort of helps to to paint the picture.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say I just love that metaphor, because I think that we probably all know people along that spectrum and those extremes. And I think it's really helpful because often people are like, what is normal? What's right? And it's so hard to know sometimes or hard to judge. So, yeah, that's a great image.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it too, Megan. I think it just captures exactly what we're trying to say here about boundaries and what boundaries need. And because we've all, lived in a house at some point in time or a flat or something, it's something we can all relate to around the meaning behind, having that structure and that safety. Because otherwise it can be a bit of one of those words that gets thrown about a bit, boundaries, good boundaries sort of thing. So it really helps to consolidate the understanding.
Yeah, and it's not always about blocking people out. I think that's what often happens is that people think, I've got to have boundaries so I don't tell anybody anything or, but it actually is about, okay, well, I want to kind of get to know people, but I don't need to tell them my whole life story on the tram, a bit like the person with no boundaries. We just figure out where is a safe amount of information to provide to this person, how much do I want to let them into my life before I know them, for example. And
it's good to work out for yourself. And I've noticed that many people have difficulty saying no or to ask for space when they need it or, to protect their boundaries when they, someone is being very insistent or demanding. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people struggle with that?
I think there's lots of different reasons. Like, sometimes people are a people pleaser. And so there's sort of, there's the two things that are going on there. That one, the person themselves actually kind of likes helping people. They like to help out their fellow person and do what they can. And, it's hard for them to sort of, turn away from somebody that's in need. But also by the other token is I think that they, that there's something about not wanting to upset other people that like if I don't help this person out then they won't like me or there's I guess that fear of rejection that can kind of come into it as well. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I sometimes call it the disease to please. Yes.
Which is this kind of, almost pathological need to say yes because you're so worried about that rejection from others or, being seen as not a nice person or not generous. But you are right in pointing out that it's like being a giving person is not all bad either. Like sometimes saying yes is a good thing to do and being kind to others can make us feel good about ourselves. So it's finding that right line, like when to say yes and when to say no.
Exactly. That's the tricky part.
Yep, that is the tricky part.
Absolutely. And I think that navigating that, it's about navigating that delicate balance between maintaining harmony in our relationships and advocating for our own needs. So how do we know when we should say no and when we should say yes? So tricky.
Tell us.
Yeah, the magical question. I mean, it's hard to give a hard and fast answer to this because there are so many different factors come into play. But sometimes it can be a bit about doing a cost-benefit analysis, that sort of having a bit of a think of, if I was to say yes to helping out this person now, what does that mean for me? That what's the cost to me that it means I won't have time to do my assignment if I help them do their assignment or, that, we can sort of end up in that dilemma. Sometimes we might need to listen to our gut. Sometimes our gut is kind of a good, pointer that, we have that really strong feeling of like, no, I definitely don't want to do this or yes, absolutely I want to do this, that we might have those strong gut feelings that can help us. Sometimes it can be a bit about, negotiation, that we might say a partial no or a partial yes, that, if someone says, can you help me with the assignment? Like we might be able to say, look, I can give you 20 minutes, but I'm due at a class, at 10:30 or something. So I've only got that amount of time, but we can have a look at a quick couple of questions perhaps first or, that we can sort of negotiate a bit about what we can give versus what we can't. The other thing that I think is often helpful is actually just posing our dilemma, that sometimes we think we have to kind of solve it all in our own head, but actually just posing the dilemma to the other person and just saying, look, I really want to help you. However, I've got an appointment at 4:00, so I'm not really sure how I'm going to be able to do both of these things.
Yes.
So that then the other person can kind of go, oh, okay, I see what you mean. Well, maybe we could visit this tomorrow or something. Or, you know, you can actually negotiate together rather than feeling like you've got to solve it all on your own.
Yeah, bring the person into the problem solving and not feeling like you're the one having to make that hard line.
And it helps you understand helps them understand your perspective as well, right? It's like, you know, you're saying here are my limitations, and, you know, it's not that I don't want to help you, which kind of maybe eliminates those feelings of guilt or worry about not being liked kind of thing, to be able to say, you know, I do want to help you, but these are the reasons why I can't do it today. And in a very sort of non-judgmental way, like, you know, it's not because I don't like you or
exactly.
I want you to suffer or anything like that. Like, there's actually a reason. And I like the partial yes/no as well. That's a good compromise.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. What do you think about cultural factors? Because I think, you know, that there are different sort of expectations maybe in different cultural groups around what you agree to, or an expectation that you agree to things or do things. So what do you think was the impact of culture on maintaining good boundaries?
Yeah, well, that's a really big thing, I think, because, you know, in sort of collectivist cultures, you know, the boundaries are a bit more diffuse. There is an expectation that everybody is kind of there for each other or the family. It's all about working together kind of thing. Whereas in Western society, it does become a bit more individualistic, and it's whatever I want is what's the most important. And, you know, if I want to do this, I should be able to do it kind of thing, regardless of what's happening for other people. So, yeah, it is a tricky thing, and I think a lot of international students, you know, find that you know, entering into a Western culture quite challenging in that respect, because it's so different to that collectivist mindset. So, yeah, I mean, I guess some of the stuff that we've already talked about can be relevant, that looking at, you know, partial yes versus no kind of thing, that might be, look, I can't do all of that, but I can do this, you know. You know, I think that sometimes maybe little white lies might be needed, which, and obviously we don't, you know, want to sort of advocate that people lie to their parents or things like that. But sometimes a little white lie may not be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, and like I can definitely speak to that, because my parents are from a different culture. They're Croatian. They were born there. I was born here. And, you know, there were a lot of expectations that I found a little bit overbearing and unreasonable at times, you know what I mean? And sort of bridging that gap between the place where I'm growing up and I'm being exposed to a very individualistic culture that's all about independence and, you know, personal rights and all of that sort of stuff, and, you know, navigating this expectation from them around, you know, do it for the family and so on. I have to say, and I'll be honest here, is that I did sometimes use the little white lies thing just to avoid a bit of conflict, because otherwise it's a lot of conflict. So you're right, we're not advocating that people lie, but also if you do find yourself in a situation where you use that as a problem-solving strategy, just know you're not alone.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, sometimes where it feels possible to do, you know, it's having conversations with parents and just letting them know, like, you know, I really do want to spend some time with my friends, whilst I also do want to, you know, do what we need to as a family and things like that. Of sort of, again, that's that, you know, collaboration on the problem solving thing, rather than thinking we've got to figure it all out. Sometimes actually talking to our parents about it, or just having a conversation about things can be a way of solving it. I guess on the other side of things, that, you know, for people from Western cultures who have friends who are from different cultures, it's important not to guilt trip them. You know,
Yes.
Give them a break. You know, they're up against it. They're, you know, they're having to try and navigate two worlds in a way. And so, not guilt tripping them for missing out on things if they have to be at a family function or whatever.
Yeah, I think that would help the sort of cultural load, like the mental load, a little bit for people that are navigating two cultures, is just to have people be understanding.
Yes. And
not kind of go, what? You know, like I was never allowed to go on school camps, and, you know, because a lot of people from other cultures are a bit frightened of their children doing things that away from them because like I can't protect you, and and so but my friends would go, what do you mean you can't go on the school camp? And I'd be like, oh, it's really embarrassing. It's so embarrassing to have to admit that. So it would have been really helpful at that time, and it was a different time. I won't out my age, but it was a different time than it is now. And I think people were not necessarily as good at picking up on the reasons for that sort of thing. I think we're a bit better at that now as a society maybe, but not guilt tripping, very helpful.
And it makes sense because, it's so hard to explain, those kind of family and cultural expectations and obligations to someone who maybe doesn't experience those. Yeah. And to be asked, well, why can't you? Why can't you say no? Why can't you stand up to them? And that's a huge conversation.
Yeah,
it is. Definitely. Thanks, Megan. That was a very thought-provoking answer. I think a lot of good nuggets in there.
Yeah, and so for people who might be trying to set boundaries, trying to be assertive, how do they deal with the often inevitable feelings of guilt when we need to push back to protect ourselves? What's a helpful way of thinking through any feelings of guilt that might come up when you need to say no?
Yeah, well, a big one I think is actually having to become friends with guilt a little bit.
Yeah.
That no. I don't know. Yeah, I know, sorry. That's not the answer everyone likes. But yeah, guilt is a normal emotion, and yeah, when we're going against something that we've always done, where we're starting to maybe be a little bit more assertive or set some boundaries, we will inevitably feel guilty, particularly if that, our reason for not having boundaries in the first place is because we want to be a people pleaser or something. Yeah, you're going to have some feelings of guilt. So I think it's important to notice, like any emotion, that the guilt might be there, but it won't last forever. That we might have that initial moment of feeling a bit guilty, but then it passes and we realise the world didn't end when I said no. And my friends are still friends with me, even though I couldn't do that thing for them. Or, we realise that the guilt that we felt wasn't realised as being a massive problem. I mean, the other things that we look at with managing guilt is sort of knowing that sometimes we need to say no to protect ourselves. That, the metaphor we often talk about is the oxygen mask on the plane, that, when we're flying, that they say you've got to fit your own mask before you fit anybody else's, because if you're passed out, you're not going to help anyone. And it's a bit the same here, is that sometimes we actually need to say no to make sure that we've still got oxygen in our tank, because otherwise we're not going to be any good to anybody else if we haven't looked after ourselves for a bit. And I think the other thing that can come in that's helpful here is being able to call out guilt trippers. That sometimes it's difficult to do this, but some of our friends, if we see that they're guilting us and saying, oh, why aren't you coming to the party, blah blah blah, we can kind of go, hey, can you not give me a hard time about this? Like, I would really love to come, but I just can't because of this other thing that I've got to do. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't make me feel worse. So, we can sort of call that out from time to time, I think, as well. That's a trickier one to do, but,
Yes. Yeah. But I like the idea of accepting that you are going to feel guilty, because I think it's unrealistic to say you can avoid feeling guilty, particularly, as you say, when you're trying to change your behaviour and you are starting to set some boundaries and you haven't done that before. I mean, it's just inevitably going to come up. But in accepting it, you learn that it passes and that it's not catastrophic and the world doesn't end, and you don't need to be so frightened of it in a way. Yeah. So, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Really powerful.
And that I suppose that we're not 100% responsible for someone's disappointment.
Yeah.
Yes.
That we try to avoid it, but sometimes people do have to deal with disappointment, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's often the other side of the coin with the guilt stuff, is that we have to also, be okay with disappointing other people, which is, very tricky. We can say it's like it's so easy to do, but absolutely is not. So it is also, like you're saying, Melissa, having to sit with that, knowing other people might be disappointed that we couldn't come to the party or that we couldn't help them with their assignment, but, they'll get through it.
Yes. So, which leads me to sort of wonder about different communication styles. Like we're sort of starting to realise the importance of boundaries, that we might need to say no sometimes, or we might need to push back sometimes, or stand up for ourselves. But how do we do it? How do we do this assertive communication? So I thought maybe it would be helpful if you could explain a bit about the different kinds of communication styles, like what's the difference between aggressive communication, assertive communication, passive or passive-aggressive? Like, how do we tell them apart?
Yeah, so I guess that I'm going to try and give some examples that sort of make sense. But yeah, starting off with passive communication, that's the kind of communication where the person is not really expressing their needs. They're not really, whether it's confidence, whether it's, another sort of thing, that they just can't let you know what they're actually thinking or what they need. So it's very indirect communication often. It's very, deferring to the other person. Oh, I'll just do whatever they want. I'll go with the flow. Those kinds of vibes are more passive. And so, phrases that you might hear a passive communicator say is, oh, it doesn't matter. We can just go to your preference, or I don't mind, whatever you need. So those are sorts of classic passive phrases.
Yes, yes.
At the other extreme end, we've got the aggressive style, which is really, the person's, it's all about their needs and wants. Whatever they want is what's most important. They can be quite demanding, can be a bit intimidating. They're often attacking as well. So a lot of name calling, kind of insults and things can come out of aggressive communicators. And they're very inflexible. So there's no negotiation. It's my way or the highway. And, that's often one of their phrases. It's my way or the highway. Or it's all your fault this didn't work. Or, those kinds of phrases.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we've got that passive-aggressive style, which is sort of a bit subversive. It's where, the person is pretty aware of what they need, but really not very good at communicating it.
That's true.
So they often come across as kind of sarcastic, a bit manipulative even sometimes. They use the silent treatment a lot. They may not say something to someone's face, they'll say it behind their back to other people, so there's a bit of rumour spreading that can kind of happen with passive aggression. So some of the phrases you might hear them say is things like, well, no offence, but, blah, 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 blah.
That's a classic one, I reckon. No offence, but I'm going to offend you.
That's
right.
But
it's okay because I said no offence, but.
Exactly, yeah. And often there's a lot of passive-aggressive behaviours, I think, are often what probably more stand out, as well as the tone of voice, So tone of voice is, like, I guess another phrase would be like, well, if that's what you really want, then fine.
Yeah.
It's that sort of, it's how they're saying it, maybe not necessarily what they're saying. And those passive-aggressive behaviours, I'm sure everyone remembers being a kid and, mum's asked us to do the dishes and we're like, fine. And we walk really slowly towards the dishes and we do them really loudly and splash water everywhere and don't wipe it properly. It's that sort of very passive-aggressive kind of way of fulfilling the task, but, making a big song and dance about it, really.
Yep.
And so then, we've got, I guess, the assertive style, and probably we'll talk a bit more about it, but it's, assertive communication is really clear, it's direct, it's quite balanced, and it's pretty respectful. So it's about conveying what the person needs and wants, whilst also recognising that the other person has got needs and wants too. So it's sort of finding that way through together of how can we balance both of our needs and wants and find a way through. So some common phrases might be things like, I'm not free this Saturday, but I could do any time after 12 on Sunday. So, it's sort of letting them know this is what I've got available and what I can't do and what I can do. Or, asking, for support with something. It might be, I'm not sure about, the wording for that answer. Are you able to workshop that with me today? So, that's sort of very clear, quite direct.
Yeah, there's no ambiguity. It's that's why it's the most successful communication style, right? Because of like that clarity. But it takes practice to be able to do it. Yeah.
Definitely. And so if I needed to tell, a student or a colleague that I'm not willing or able to do a favour for them, like, have a look at my assignment or copy my answers or something. Can you give us some examples of those communication styles, so aggressive, assertive, passive, and passive-aggressive ways of responding to that?
All right. Well, I suppose starting off easily, it would be the passive person will say, well, I guess I can, show you what I've done so far on my assignment, pretty much just immediately acquiesce. Whereas the aggressive person would probably come in pretty strong and say, hell no, what's wrong with you? Of course you can't copy my assignment. They're very, very, direct and kind of insulting in the process.
Yeah.
And then that passive aggressive, I guess they might come in with something sarcastic, like, oh, sure, that way we'll both fail.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's sort of very, very sarcastically stating that, they don't want to do that. Whereas, if we sort of do the assertive one, it's, I'm not comfortable with you copying my assignment, but I can help answer some questions you have about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's nice.
I like it.
And that's almost like a partial yes as well, isn't it? Or a partial no.
Yeah. So it's a very clear boundary up front. I'm not comfortable with you doing that, but I can, provide you with this.
And you're owning that you're not comfortable with it. It's not, you're not saying what's wrong with you like the aggressive person was. You're actually saying, I'm not comfortable with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might skip over that. Try to avoid taking some ownership for it, but I think it's actually really important to set that up, like you said, to kind of make your boundaries really clear at the start.
Yeah. Because often that pushy student, they probably know that it's not okay to copy someone else's assignment. They know that. They're just testing a boundary, essentially, is what they're doing by saying, will you be someone that's passive and let me just do this?
And they might think, well, we're friends, so that's what friends do for each other.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's hone in on the assertive way of doing things a little bit more. And I think it's important to note, as you said, that being assertive is not being aggressive, but is often mistaken as such. So some people think that they're being assertive when they're actually being aggressive. And therefore the idea of being assertive can feel quite scary, because if you go from being a passive person to this insulting, demanding, rude person, that's a big jump. So I just want to point out that it's definitely not that. But if we want to learn to communicate assertively, can you give us some examples of how to do that?
Yeah, well, I think it's, that's sort of what I was saying before. The key difference between aggressive and assertive is that, assertive people will want to communicate about their needs and wants, but they know that the other person also has needs and wants. So,
good point.
The aggressive person they don't care. They will just steamroll. But the assertive person, they know that the other person also has needs and wants. So it's about that kind of inviting space that, that the assertive communication is about clearly stating your perspective or your needs and wants and being really direct about that, and then inviting the other person to share theirs. That's a real key skill, I think, with assertiveness. And then to follow on from that, it's really making sure that you've demonstrated that you've heard the other person, that when they've shared their needs and wants with you, that you say, okay, so I can see that actually you'd prefer to do it this way, or, that you repeat back to them what you've understood them to have said, because that makes sure that you're on the right page, as well as, it helps the other person feel like they've been listened to. So that's a very good assertive skill as well. I statements are another classic kind of assertiveness skill that we often talk about. So it's phrasing things like Melissa was saying, sort of owning things, so phrasing it from an I perspective. So I'm not comfortable with that, or I'd prefer to do it this way, or I'd like, for us to be able to complete it today, or that you're sort of owning your perspective.
Your side of it, yeah.
Because that's not blaming. I guess that the flip side of that would be like the blame thing, which is what the aggressive person comes up with, isn't it? It's like, oh, you never want to do it this way, or you're always late, or you're, it's that very blamey type language. Yeah, I mean, I suppose sometimes if you're in a conversation with someone trying to be assertive, at the other person's sort of maybe a bit aggressive, that you don't have to stay in that conversation, that it's okay to leave that. You can just sort of say, rather than kind of elevating to their level and starting name calling and blaming and stuff as well, it can be just saying, look, I think we've probably reached the end of this conversation. I'm, going to go now.
Yeah, so you don't have to feel trapped or
That's
attacked,
right.
or that you have to attack back. Yeah,
Yeah, so I suppose to give a bit of a tip of an assertive phrase would be the following. So I'd like to have lunch with you. I'm happy to have something from the food court. What would you like to do? So you sort of,
Nice.
very clearly saying this is what I'd like, and these are the parameters around it. That, you know, I just want to go to the food court, not out to, you know, 5-star restaurant. Yeah, what would your preference be? So it's inviting the other person's perspective as well.
Nice. I like that example. And it brings to mind when I first started learning about assertive communication, and it didn't come naturally to me, I have to say. You know, I think a lot of young women are more passive, generally speaking, because we're often raised to be pleasing and nice and all of those things. It just doesn't, it's not something we're sort of, I suppose, trained to do from early on. And I had a situation where I needed to, something happened. I actually do theatre. I was in a show and the director made a decision that I was very unhappy about, and being passive, I said nothing and I went home and I went, oh, I'm so mad, and I like stewed in my anger and I was like so cross, and then I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to say something. And that was so against my natural sort of way of doing things. And so I'd just been learning about this assertive communication stuff and I went, right, I'm going to give that a try. And I scripted it. I actually scripted it out. And I used the sentence structure, which is, when you made this decision, I felt upset. There's the I statement, because it seems like you were not taking my needs into consideration. So I was giving them an explanation of why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And what I would like is for you to reconsider your decision. And I was shaking like a leaf. I was like, I rehearsed it so many times, right? And I had more phrases to say because I was expecting him to push back again. And he just said, okay. which, you know, and I was always like mid-breath, like, and furthermore, what did you just say? So, you know, that early experience of trying out assertive communication for me really consolidated the power of it, because I was calm. I wasn't accusatory. I wasn't like yelling at him. I was sort of explaining how I felt and inviting a solution, which he was quite happy to offer. So after that, I went, I'm going to do that more. But like, I think the idea of like scripting it when you're just learning is actually a good idea. You don't have to pull the script out and go, wait, I'm going to be assertive now, and then read it out. But like, I think just writing it out a few times can make it roll off the tongue a little bit more easily when the time comes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Practice makes perfect. And yeah, if you've not done it before, you've got to start somewhere, and exactly scripting it out and practicing is a good idea.
And the safety of a bedroom is a really good place to start.
It is, exactly.
Yeah. I love that example, because I think people are so afraid, and you were very afraid in that moment of how that would turn out. And it, you know, most people think, I'm too scared. It's not going to end well. I'm not going to do it. Yeah. And I think that really shows that these things can go really well. And you can be so scared, but it, you know, as long as you sort of phrase it in a way that feels right to you and honors your perspective, you know, it's better to have said something than nothing at all.
Yeah. Especially when he was so willing to go, oh yeah, okay.
And then I got the outcome that I wanted. If I hadn't done it, I would have just stewed in my anger for a lot longer. You know, it's like, that's not a comfortable place to be. And then I would have been resentful, and I would probably have been covertly glaring at him.
Then you get into passive-aggressive territory.
Then I get into passive-aggressive territory, you know. So, so I think it was a really good learning experience to sort of understand that, yes, when you do this, sometimes it works out really well. Often it works out really well. Because, you know, as you say, when you do own how you feel, when you're not attacking, when you're not accusatory, when you're calm, when you're clear, when you're direct, and when you take into account the other person's perspective, you can have a conversation. You're not going to trigger defensiveness in the other person. Which is when communication tends to break down and people just get into like slinging grenades at each other. You know, so it is powerful. So try it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the other thing I suppose as well is like we're talking about, you know, we don't do these things because we're so fearful. And, you know, like even if you had said that, Liz, and then, you know, he said, no, absolutely not. What I said stands, you know, and he sort of knocked back what you said. you know, of course you're going to be disappointed, but at least you tried.
Yes.
And there's something about that, I think, that, you know, we can feel like we gave it our best shot, you know. That,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would have, if he'd still dug his heels in and not been willing to change his decision, I would have at least been proud of myself that I said something about it.
That's right.
That I raised it. So, you know, that's the compensation, I suppose, even if it doesn't quite go your way.
Yeah.
But at least knowing that you tried, that you did stand up for yourself.
Yeah. Such a great point, because I think we have to remember that these things won't always go our way.
Yeah.
Like, as much as we're saying this can go really well, sometimes people won't meet us halfway, and that's just a fact of life. And at least you know that I said my truth, and I said it respectfully.
Yes.
And I made I made myself known. So yeah, so important.
Very important.
Could we talk a bit about, you know, the kind of tone of voice that you would use? What does assertive talk sound like?
I think, you know, it's calm, it's firm, it's clear. You know, you want to kind of look at people when you're communicating, I think, is the other thing, having that sort of open posture. Yeah, we're not sort of coming in really intense and, you know, really like
getting into people's personal space,
Yeah,
or
that's
like
right.
pushing and shoving them kind of things.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that sort of more open kind of posture, but giving a safe amount of distance. Yeah, calm and firm voice. Yeah. Listening, showing that you're listening, when they're talking as well. Yeah.
I sometimes say to my clients, I'm going to teach you how to be a counsellor, because let's just peek behind the curtain for a minute. That's our bread and butter, really, is to kind of reflect back to people what we've heard, so that they know that we've understood them. And being understood is so powerful. When someone says, I get it, I get how you feel, is this what it is? And you just the relief in going, yes, you do understand. That can just take the heat out of a conversation pretty quickly.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're teaching you all to be counsellors as well now. Shh, just keep it between us. Yeah. Well, what other ideas do you have for improving your assertiveness skills? Because as we've said, it often doesn't come naturally. So how can our listeners work on strengthening their assertiveness muscle?
Well, like we've already said, I think it's about practicing, you know. So, you know, there's two ways, I guess. You could choose someone that you know really well. So there's sort of, you know, some safety in that relationship, that you know that while I'm practicing, they're not going to, you know, run away from me or something. And you can let them know that. You can say, look, I want to try and practice being a bit more assertive, so that they kind of know that you're going to be trying that out. Or conversely, you can try practicing on people that you don't know, you know, so it might be at the shops or something, or you know, a person that's helping at the shops or something like that, or a new person that you're meeting in class. So practicing communication with them, because they don't have any preconceived ideas of you yet. So yeah, that sort of, it feels a bit low risk, that you're not going to upset the apple cart too much, because there is no apple cart to
you don't really
with.
know them. There's no relationship to preserve.
That's right.
Yeah.
So a bit like you were saying as well, there's scripting, I think, is really helpful. So, you know, if you're sitting at home kind of thinking, this is what I really need to say, and then starting, you know, writing that out, trying to phrase it that it's coming from you, so that I statements is a good way of doing that. Thinking about what you might want to know from the other person, so thinking about how you'd invite their perspective into the conversation, and writing a bit of a script out would be helpful. And I mean, I think that's the thing, is that once you start trying it out, you'll probably find that you're often met with a bit more respect. Like you in your example, Liz, that, you know, often it's that sort of, it's a bit like sort of a letdown in a way, that there wasn't this big kind of major pushback or anything. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah sure. You know, so quite often we're met with that respect, in that, you know, when we've spoken up for ourselves, people are quite respectful of that. And it's often, you get that engagement, that people are willing to have a conversation with you about something when you're assertive. And I mean, if other people aren't sort of engaging in that way, which is pretty rare, I think, it's probably saying more about them and how they are
So
as a person.
true.
That it's got less about you, and it's not saying that you're bad at assertiveness. It's probably more that they are not good at assertiveness or not good at engaging in a
respectful conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing your knowledge and time today and taking us through the skills of boundary setting and assertiveness. You've given us some great insights and practical strategies for knowing when to say no, how to say no, and how to communicate in an assertive way. I hope that if there's one thing our listeners take away, it's that asserting your boundaries and saying no when necessary is not being mean, but a way of prioritizing your well-being so you can stay healthy and ultimately have healthier relationships. Assertive communication is respectful but firm, and we encourage you to give it a try. At first, it might feel really strange, but it gets easier the more you practice it, and hopefully you'll feel more empowered. Thank you for tuning in today, and subscribe to the Counselling Armchair to get new episodes when they become available. We are so pleased you're able to take a seat in our Counselling Armchair, and see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair, Nurturing Wellbeing and Study. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it through with love.